Good afternoon. Let me tell you a little bit about what we've been involved within the Corps of Engineers since the storm hit. We've been busy little beavers, let me tell you. You heard George Pavlou mention earlier, I think Dave Ogren also mentioned the emergency support functions, the activities that are basically managed by FEMA that we get as agencies to execute, and the infrastructure support function that we are managing. I guess it primarily came down to three basic missions. Emergency power, which is pretty much done at this point. That was important in the early part of the storm recovery phase. The unwatering of all of the tunnels, subway tunnels, PBSC, it was mentioned, and the tunnels under the Hudson River, Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, that was managed by us, and debris cleanup. Thus far, about $300 million worth of mission assignments in those areas have been done. And if we were talking about impacts to the coastal areas, Long Island beaches, to New Jersey beaches, we'd be talking about breaches and filling in breaches in some of those barrier-island areas. But let's go back to the harbor. First, I want to talk about what our own experience was at our Caven Point facility, and that's because the Caven Point facility is where we have as our operating base for the ship collection vessels and for our survey unit, as well as support to other groups like NOAA. We have NOAA survey vessels that also periodically operate out of there. So it's an important facility. And normally what we'll do when a storm is approaching, where it's predicted to be flooding, is we'll secure things, we'll send the vehicles and the trailable boats up the road to higher ground. We'll put up storm gates. We'll put equipment inside the buildings and inside the shop area. We'll move things to higher shelves if we're worried about them getting impacted by flooding. And normally we've only gotten a foot of water on the facility. And what we'll do is with our drift boats is we'll send them up the Hudson River. We sent them up to the area around Haverstraw Bay. We were also contemplating, normally we would leave one or two people at the facility in case something breaks, in case a window breaks, they can put up boards or something like that if the storm is coming. This time we decided, it's probably not a good idea. We don't really know. It's supposed to be a bad one. We're not sure how bad it's going to be, and I don't want to expose people to danger. In hindsight, that was a very smart move, because when the boats came back from riding out the storm up the river, and they didn't just anchor there. They were actually underway as if they were out in the ocean. There were 6-foot swells in Haverstraw Bay. So they were working all night. When they got back to the facility, what they saw was what looked like a bombed-out facility. About 5 feet of water with waves on top of that had swept across the whole facility. Interior cinder block walls were knocked down. Things were tossed around. Cranes were tipped over inside the building by the waves. Okay? So everything was knocked out. We didn't have access to our fuel tanks. The fuel tanks were fine. Luckily, they didn't breach or anything. But we had no pumps. We had no electricity. The gasoline tanks were flooded with salt water. And we basically had a facility that wasn't operational for an important function in the days ahead, which was debris removal, marine debris removal, and surveys. We lost about well over $100,000, several $100,000 worth of survey equipment that had been put up high on shelves that was still lost in the storm. We still can't find certain things. So that's what happened to our Caven Point facility. We still had to perform our mission, and let's get back to the port, what that mission was. In the port community here, we have a very well-organized group. And we've had a lot of experience. We've had 9/11, we've had Irene and Lee last year. So we've had some practice. And the Coast Guard basically operates commercial traffic in the port. So they have several committees, the Harbor Operations Committee, but they also have something called the Marine Transportation System Recovery Unit, MTSRU we call it, because we love acronyms. And that group is responsible for planning for and responding to port closures. So The port was closed in accordance with certain emergency management plans that the Coast Guard had. All the vessels were sent out to sea. There were no big vessels sitting at anchor anywhere in the port. So that group got together to take a look at what needed to be done to bring those vessels back, and vessels that were scheduled to come into the port. And the first priority was to see whether there were obstructions in any of the channels. I mean, it became pretty clear to everybody that we weren't dealing with an Irene Lee type event, which was heavy rain, which was a lot of sediment movement in the estuary, a lot of freshwater influx. We were dealing with a coastal event, coastal flooding, extraordinarily high tides, and a storm surge. So the main concern was debris. Everything from pieces of houses, boats, docks, even to shipping containers that had gotten washed off their wharves. So it took several days. It took about 3 or 4 days between us and NOAA and even the Sandy Hook pilots to determine whether the main shipping channels were free of debris or not. For the most part, they were. There were a few places where we had to respond. But the first priority was to reopen the port to bring fuel barges in, because there was an issue with fuel. It really wasn't a shortage. It was an electricity problem because people couldn't get to the fuel tanks. And the fuel wasn't moving throughout the harbor. It's mostly a marine operation to get fuel from the facilities that store it and process it to the consumer. So there were a lot of power issues. We're still in the process of cleaning up debris from this storm. And one of the things that the Coast Guard and us are worried about is that the next moon tide is tomorrow night. And there's a lot of debris that wound up back in the marshes way above normal tides. And that's going to start coming off. And every time we have a moon tide, we're going to see more and more of that. Just to give you an idea of the amount of debris we collected in the 3 weeks after the storm was about the same amount of debris that we would normally collect in about 3 months. So it's a lot of stuff out there, and there's even more that's on the way. And it's kind of that type of debris, what we're calling marine debris or wet debris or something like that, is not part of the debris collection FEMA mission assignment. That's all stuff coming from houses and on land. So right now, that material is in kind of a no man's land. Right? I mean, the Corps of Engineers has a mission to pick it up when it's floating, but nobody has a mission to go into the marsh and get it. The Coast Guard has a mission to clean up spills, so they're actively going out. They have a whole team that's actively going out, making sure any of these vessels that may be up high in the marshes that will run up there after the storm are free of fuel and oil and things like that, but they don't have the authority to remove them. So this is an issue in the next few weeks, or I should say next few months, that's going to be an important one for us to look at, because it affects the estuary, but really not being addressed programmatically. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.